Number 1. In this question, you will be asked to give your opinion about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to prepare your response and 45 seconds to speak.
Some students would rather write a paper than take a test. Other students would rather take a test instead of writing a paper. Which option do you prefer and why? Use specific reasons and examples to support your opinion.
Begin to prepare your response after the beep. Begin speaking after the beep.
Number 2. In this question, you will read a short passage about a campus situation and then listen to a talk on the same topic. You will then answer a question using information from both the reading passage and the talk. After the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak.
A student is discussing the university's health insurance policy with the foreign student advisor. Read the policy in the college schedule. You have 45 seconds to complete it. Please begin reading now. Now listen to the foreign student advisor. He is explaining the policy and expressing his opinion about it.
I think it's very important for you to know that this policy wasn't instituted in order to increase fees for international students. In fact, the university doesn't make a profit from the sale of health insurance. The problem is that health care costs in this country are so high that it could be financially disastrous for the family of an international student who needed more than just a simple visit to the doctor's office. A trip to the emergency room at the hospital could cost thousands of dollars without health insurance. Most families abroad just don't realize how costly it is. As for foreign health insurance providers, well, it was just too difficult to validate their coverage for medical services, and the local doctors and hospitals simply stopped accepting them. So, to be sure that our students are protected, we're offering low-cost health insurance through the school.
The foreign student advisor expresses his opinion of the policy for health insurance. Report his opinion and explain the reasons that he gives for having that opinion.
Begin to prepare your response after the beep. Begin speaking after the beep.
Number 3. In this question, you will read a short passage on an academic subject and then listen to a talk on the same topic. You will then answer a question using information from both the reading passage and the talk. After the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak.
Now read the passage about Antarctica. You have 45 seconds to complete it. Please begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture in a geography class. The professor is talking about Antarctica.
With the increasing pressure to replace raw materials that are being consumed in other parts of the world, Antarctica and the waters offshore could become a stage for international conflict in the future. During the 18th and 19th centuries, hunters decimated huge populations of whales and seals, and the race to reach the South Pole resulted in national claims by explorers from a variety of countries, which finally resulted in the partitioning of pie-shaped sectors radiating away from the center at the pole. So, today, several claims overlap, and only one sector remains unclaimed. Virtually all of these claims are covered by an ice sheet about 2 miles thick. But the question is, what's beneath the ice? Scientific experiments indicate that proteins, fuels, and minerals exist in abundance, and that means that in spite of the difficulties and challenges involved in the exploitation of these natural resources, the countries with claims haven't demonstrated an intention to relinquish their stake in the area. While resources are available in more convenient sites, the remote areas in Antarctica appear to be relatively safe from exploitation. In addition, as the reading passage suggests, global self-interest may engender international cooperation in this crucial environmental system.
Explain why many countries have staked claims in Antarctica and why national interests have not been pursued.
Begin to prepare your response after the beep. Begin speaking after the beep.
Number 4. In this question, you will listen to a short lecture. You will then be asked to summarize important information from the lecture. After you hear the question, you will have 20 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a sociology class. The professor is discussing the criteria for using older research references.
Well, first of all, you have to understand that there's no hard and fast rule for deciding when a research reference is too old. But that doesn't help you much. So I'll try to give you a couple of guidelines, and then you'll just have to use good judgment. Okay, let's just say for our purposes that the research is 30 years old. Then the next thing to think about is whether any changes have occurred in society to call the data into question. For example, in a study that looks at diet, we know logically that many changes have occurred in eating patterns over the past 30 years, so this study would probably be out of date. But a study of, say, language development may be okay because the way that babies learn their native language hasn't changed much in the same period of time. So what I'm saying is, the date is less important than the potential for change. Okay, then the second criteria to consider is whether the citation is a finding or an opinion. If you have a study that indicates, for example, that college students are drinking more, that's a finding. But if you have a statement by the researcher that drinking is the most serious problem on campus, then you have an opinion. And opinions are accurate over the years as long as they're attributed to the person and the dates cited. But the finding for an older study may be too old. In that case, it's probably better to use a more recent study.
Using the main points and examples from the lecture, describe the two criteria for using an older research reference presented by the professor.
Begin to prepare your response after the beep. Begin speaking after the beep.
I prefer to write a paper instead of taking a test, because I know exactly what the topic is when I'm researching a paper, but there are a large number of possibilities for questions on a test, and that makes it much more difficult to prepare for. Besides, in my experience, some teachers aren't very straightforward about their tests, and even though I've studied and understand the subject, well, sometimes the questions that you'd expect to see aren't on the test, and some obscure information is tested instead. But probably the most important reason for my preference is that I get very nervous when I'm taking a test, and that can affect my performance. Writing a paper doesn't cause me the same level of anxiety.
The foreign student advisor agrees with the policy that requires international students to purchase health insurance from the university at registration. He assures students that the university isn't trying to increase fees for international students by doing this. He explains that health care is very expensive. For example, a visit to the emergency room can be a financial burden to a family who doesn't have medical insurance. He says that most families of international students don't expect the cost to be so excessive. And the reason that the university doesn't allow students to substitute other healthcare providers is because the local medical community has had problems with validation for health insurance plans from abroad and now refuses to accept them. So, in order to protect the students, the school doesn't make any exceptions to the policy.
Many countries have staked claims in Antarctica because the natural resources in other areas are being depleted, and research indicates that minerals, fuels, and even some sources of protein are probably under the ice in large quantities. So, the implication is that as raw materials are exploited in areas that are relatively easy to reach, nations will think about taking advantage of their claims. For the time being, the location and climate have discouraged exploitation, and so have the treaties that protect the environment and encourage scientists to collaborate. It's also worth mentioning that Antarctica's vitally important to the balance that's maintained in the environment worldwide. So, in addition to all the difficulties that would have to be overcome to take advantage of the resources in their claims, individual nations also recognize the danger to the global environment and, at least for now, they're not pursuing their national interests.
According to the lecturer, there are two major criteria for using an older research reference. First, she mentions, and I'm quoting here, the potential for change. For example, research on diet may be too old after 30 years because many changes have occurred in dietary practices during that time. But research on language development may be okay because fewer changes have taken place in language acquisition in the same number of years. The other criteria requires that you first identify the research as a conclusion or an opinion, because, in general, a conclusion may be outdated when a newer study is published, but an opinion credited to a person with the date of the opinion in the citation, that's correct over time. In other words, there's no exact number of years to decide whether a reference is acceptable, so the date isn't as significant as the criteria. So, an older study can be used if changes in the research haven't taken place, or if the results are worded as opinions with the dates cited.